Recovery isn't meant to be your life, it's meant to give you your life back.
That was April Garfoli, owner of Recovery Concepts and Consulting, and we're talking about treatment centers. This is the Recover Yourself podcast, where we address topics you'll face while on a journey to recovering yourself. And I'm your host, MartinJon, the Recovery Mentor. This week, April and I get to talking about recovery programs, how they work for and sometimes against us. We break down how they're funded because sometimes that is a very important bit of information that might help you navigate the system if you find yourself in it. April has worked in corrections, detox, residential, dual diagnosis, in and outpatients, home, school, and community centers. She has a master's in clinical counseling and a psychology degree. Her experience gives her a very unique perspective on the whole system, which is why I'm so excited to present her and her wisdom here on my podcast. Conflicts that have arisen regarding personal and ethical standards between her and organizations she's worked with is what sent April out on her own to found Recovery Concepts and Consulting. I have to admit, the fact that April likes what I'm presenting enough to be interviewed by me is a feather in my cap, and I am very grateful for that. The Recover Yourself podcast is about expanding the definition and scope of addiction and recovery so each of us has an opportunity to recover ourselves no matter where we are on the journey. Some of you may find yourself or loved ones in a treatment center, and if so, I hope this episode is a wonderful resource for you. April, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, when I can find someone that speaks the same language as deeply as we can, it's a rare find. So
the energy is something, I'm attracted to. Your energy is phenomenal, and I share that excitement with you. It's so hard to find like-minded people on this level, so I really am. I'm truly gratitude, just so ecstatic, really.
So today we're going to talk a lot about treatment. What is your experience of treatment centers? And I don't know how to start this, where it's like many treatment centers are traditionally funded by government.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that not in line with what the mission of a treatment center could be?
So traditionally you have, like you're saying, the government funded. You're going to have obviously nonprofit and for-profit, okay? I've worked for both, which has been an interesting experience. And what I believe is when we're talking about where the funding is coming from, I truly believe that genuinely everybody in their heart, in their soul, has pure motives to genuinely want to help other people when they get into this line of work. Whether they're opening the treatment facility, whether they're working in it, running it, however that goes. What I think the important thing to remember is when we're talking about them is that at the end of the day, regardless of where the funding is coming from, it's a business. It has to function somewhat as a business. And businesses are made up of people at the end of the day. So if the people that are running the facilities aren't healthy, don't have self-awareness, then it doesn't matter how much education you're going to have. It doesn't matter what the background is. If you don't have self-awareness, you're not going to be able to relate to people that are coming into these facilities. I don't know if that makes sense as far as your question goes, but the lack of, and to look into self is a very difficult thing. And so where I think they end up failing is it's not that the intentions aren't genuine. I think things just start to get lost as far as, it doesn't become the primary focus anymore because treatment facilities end up being focused on how many people do they have on the census? How many beds do they have to fill? And unfortunately, that starts to take over as opposed to what's the quality of care that we're providing versus, the quantity. Do we want to help, X amount of people? And then how are we going to measure the help that we're providing them? How are we going to measure this quality of care? Which is actually, when you're getting into that, the insurance companies are the ones who are going to dictate, what the quality of care is going to be. So a lot of times the treatment facilities, their hands are tied because whoever is funding the treatment is really going to dictate that, especially now within the past 6 months Things have changed so rapidly where, regardless of the motive of the provider, they have to answer to the funding at the end of the day.
Let's say I am moving into the world of sobriety in one way or another, whether it's through court or through, my choice, and I end up in a treatment facility. What do I need to know is their priority?
Their priority genuinely is to help you. It really is. But they have a they have an idea of how they're going to do it, and they have also an idea of what the outcome should be for you. And so how they measure that is, are you going to pee clean in a cup or not? Because the first thing that's driving somebody into rehab obviously is drug and alcohol use, right? And so the first step they're going to go into is detox, and that's that physical pain that they want to get rid of. And so that's the front line of things that's going to happen. And so once you get in there, they're going to treat the physical symptoms, and then they're going to say, we need to clear up the thought process. Like you're saying, you have to get the thinking back. And that takes about, 30 days, to really get some sort of clarity back within your thoughts. But that's kind of it. That's kind of where it stops. And, their line is they're going to get you, they're going to kind of triage you. It's just the beginning of things. Where they kind of fail is they're not giving you the big picture. It's just not enough. They're not digging deep enough because of the funding being government driven. Obviously politics get into that, and they don't necessarily want to go deep into the emotional realm of things, into the spiritual realm of things, which is getting back into authentic self and reconnecting with soul.
Right.
So there tends to be a lack of depth in that. And when you're saying, how are they failing in that matter? Again, it's coming back to, how connected is the person that you're meeting with authentic self? I don't know what's right. When I'm approaching that, I don't know what's right for somebody. I don't know, what the solution's going to be for them. I can give you multiple avenues of how to get somewhere, but I'm not going to tell you what the end destination is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Taking control of your treatment is important. Now, if you're in a treatment facility for drug and alcohol, you might not know what the hell to do at all. And so that's a big ask of somebody to, and so, in the rooms where, I spent some of my early sobriety we talked about, well, your actions got you this far. Now you have to listen to other people, right? Like you have to try something else.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's good. Sit down, stick the cotton in your ear.
Right.
Just shut up. We're going to tell you.
Right. Yeah. And where does that fit in? How does that fit in? Or I think that's good advice early on.
I do too. I don't disagree with it.
Right.
I definitely think there needs to be that moment where you have to just start sitting with yourself and absorbing, taking all that in. But I always feel like there has to be that moment where you're allowing them to, I always say, let it float up, let the authentic self start to come up, because you've been suffocating it for so long with the drugs and the alcohol. And when you first come in, you're looking for that help. You're looking to anybody that's, you think is going to give it to you. And there's just been such a minimization of just the shame and the guilt. And they'll say, well, the client's the expert, right? And I do believe that to an extent, but sometimes you got to have somebody that's, you got to connect. I always say real recognizes real. And if the person in front of you that's trying to help you isn't being authentic with you and isn't being real, and how it's like your experience in the medical, world, the medical model, which is the approach that they do use in rehabs, it's failing us all the way around. It's not just failing us in addiction, it's failing us in all disease as far as how we treat this. So when you're talking about like your experience with that, I was diagnosed with lupus about 20 years ago. And I went through, oh my gosh, doctor after doctor, and we're going to do this test, and you're going to take this drug and this drug and that drug. And, you know, insurance is going to pay for this. They're not going to pay for this, to the point where, you know, you feel like you're the third party out. And there's the payer and the payee, and they're going back and forth. And you're just totally left out, and you feel inhuman, you know? We just want to feel connected. It's the connection that tends to get lost in treatment and in rehabs, because, you know, there's no authentic self being reflected back from staff, you know, and then therefore clients are just getting sucked in, ka-chunk, 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 push them out, push them through.
And I want to bring it, I do want to bring it into treatment centers, and I want to kind of talk, what made you walk away?
I think I was too real. I was looking for real. I was looking for depth. I wasn't finding it. There were times when I was working for treatment facilities, I questioned everything. Why are we doing it this way? Well, this is the way we've always done it. It doesn't feel like this is working, but this is what we do. Those answers weren't good enough for me. Mm-hmm. And there were jobs that I walked away from, and there was accounts where I got the boot, you know, where I was terminated.
What was the purpose for what was the stated purpose for their
insubordination, which is very broad in general and can fit whatever, you know, you want to make it fit. But, you know, when you question authority, they don't like it.
Right.
And if somebody is self-assured and somebody is, I don't want to say it, you know, when somebody's self-assured and confident, you know, to say, I'm not sure, why is that happening? Why are we doing it this way? It doesn't feel right. This feels icky. I'm not going to bill for this when this service didn't happen. You become inconvenient real quick, and it's like, just go away. Because they want somebody that's just going to not question anything, just fall in line, get it done, and keep moving. Which I think obviously we can see because there's a rapidly high turnover in staff in these facilities. That's frightening. And nobody really looks into that and says, well, what's going on here? And there tends to be a high number of individuals that are also, you know, in recovery, working in treatment facilities. So it's a touchy subject, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. But if you're coming into this in that early sobriety, which I will define, you know, usually as anything less than 5 years to me is early sobriety. Now, I'm not saying you don't have anything to offer, because that's, no matter where anyone is in this process, they have something to offer. But if you're not firmly grounded in who you are, what your values are, what your beliefs are, and you're working for, you know, an agency that, you know, might not reflect your personal values and beliefs, and you're asked to do something that might go against them, are you going to have the ability to question an authority figure? Right. Mostly not, because then you're getting into like parent-child dynamics. You know what I mean? And there's a power differential there. And so somebody in early sobriety, my heart breaks for them, because when clients say, you know, I want to go and I want to work in rehabs because I want to help people, and they genuinely do, and I think that's great. But I'll usually say, you know, let's hit pause for minutes, you know, because just because you want to help people doesn't mean you have to get into this line of work, because it's going to bring its whole other slew of things that if you're not, you know, if you can't take that pushback, that kickback, it'll break you. And it's broken me multiple times across the board, you know, and still does, you know, as a human being. You really have to be solid in who you are, what you value.
Yeah. So let's get into the people who work at these places. So we have a couple different styles of counselors, right? Like that are working within these that can very well a lot, like you've mentioned to me, a lot of people don't even know what kind of counselor they have. So what kind of counselors can they have when they go into a treatment facility?
Yeah, so there's a vast array. There is initially what you're probably going to be, you're going to meet with somebody that's usually what we call a licensed chemical dependency counselor. or a chemical dependency counselor assistant. So that can vary. It can be somebody with an associate's degree that's done a certification training online, or it can be somebody who is a licensed professional clinical counselor that will maybe hold a master's degree and a supervisory certification on top of that. So, you're coming into rehab, and one person might get assigned somebody who is the chemical dependency counselor assistant. Another person might get assigned somebody who's a licensed professional counselor. Problem with that is anyone certified under the Chemical Dependency Board is not licensed and credentialed to treat mental health, which is the depression, anxiety, trauma.
And personally, I've never seen anybody with an addiction that didn't have a dual diagnosis.
Thank you. Yeah, so dual diagnosis is the key here. A lot of facilities are not dual diagnosis facilities. So there's a lot of facilities out there that will treat this. They'll address it, but they're not licensed and credentialed to do so. And right now, addiction and mental health is still treated as separate. So that's another, issue that supersedes just the treatment facilities as a whole. It's how we're looking at this in its entirety. Are we going to put addiction under mental health? Are we not? I mean, personally, I don't know how you separate the two. There's always trauma. In my experience, there's trauma. There's an underlying trauma. How you want to define that and its severity is a different story. But if you're not getting to the core of what the problem is, drugs and alcohol are not the problem.
Right.
So you could be certified as a chemical dependency counselor, and that's great, but that's just treating one small symptom of this. Like, who's getting to the core of this? So,
and I want to step in just really quick and say that just because they have this certification doesn't necessarily mean they can't like service the entirety. But on the whole, they're not trained in the way that someone with a master's degree is.
Right. And speaking back, to you got to be careful with trauma because it's a tricky thing. If you're not, you can't take someone somewhere that you can't bring them back from. And so if you're working in this field, and your trauma isn't, because everybody's got trauma, right? Something's happened, if you don't, and again, to me, if you don't have the self-awareness to know what you can and what you can't, that tends to be where some harm can happen in the process of that. So, they can definitely, you can address all that, but as far as how you're going to go about treating that, it gets a little dicey, for sure.
This is something that I've seen. You you graduated your DUI, your DUI programming, and now you're going to be one of our counselors. Like how does that pass muster?
If you can figure that out, it does, because here's the problem. When you hear the word counselor, people think traditional, sitting on the couch, the shrink, going to address all the mental health problems. They think counselor therapist. Mm-hmm. People just don't know. There's just a lack of awareness about the varying levels of degrees and certifications and what's out there, and it's confusing. There's a lot. But I always tell people, ask who's treating you. What are the credentials of the people treating you? Because anybody worth their weight in salt is going to refer you out for something that they might not have experienced. And listen, just because somebody's, might be that clinical counselor, if it's not their field or their niche, and they feel that somebody else is more appropriate to handle that, you refer out. And so when you're saying, how do they get in here? How does that cut mustard? They need staff, and unfortunately, it's like the more beds you have, the more staff you need. Here you go. It's also, I think people seek that out. It's a safe environment to work. They'll initially say, well, I want to stay sober. I want to help people. Well, let me go work in a rehab facility. It's also, to me, and this is it's a little bit of a cop-out, because I'm thinking recovery isn't meant to be your life. It's meant to give you your life back. And so what did you really want to do? Like, what was it that you really wanted to be? What were you seeking out? Like, what was the passion that was driving you, Maybe maybe that job's going to play a small role and take you so far. But what is, what really gets you ticking? What did you give up on before all of this happened in your life? And how can I get you reconnected to that? And one of the ways they get around this when you have such a vast discrepancy in your staff is they no longer refer to the person you're going to see in rehab as a counselor. Everybody across the board now is called a primary provider.
Language is funny, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So you're a primary. So you're going to meet with your primary provider today. And I mean, and people coming in rehab, they don't know, it's overwhelming. They see, as long as someone sees something thrown on the wall, you don't even. I'm guilty of that. It's kind of like if you go to the doctor nowadays, you're really meeting with the doctor is what I compare it to. You're usually meeting with a physician's assistant or a licensed nurse, which again is fine. But when you're getting into that trauma, you're cutting somebody open. And you better hope that you have the training to do that, to really get in there on that formal level.
So we've brought up a couple things. One, treatment facilities are a business, and businesses, as we know here in the United States, are mandated to work for profit. Do you get paid per person that comes through your facility?
Correct. Yeah.
So the more people you have coming through your facility, the more money you're going to get.
Correct.
And the less you have to pay your counselors, the more money you get to take home. So what can we expect going into these? We can expect that they are a business, and that do I know of a facility that says it is strictly like donor funded. When they say that, do they mean that?
I mean,
because we're always looking, because I look at that and I go, I want to believe that.
Yeah.
But if you're taking any mandated person, wouldn't there be funding from some sort of an agency?
Yeah, when they're mandated, usually you're talking, about the courts.
Court ordered.
Sometimes court ordered, some depending upon, where they will have funds available, grants available that will cover the treatment. Unfortunately, 70% of the clientele in those facilities are funded through Medicaid insurance and things like that. So it's always coming back around to that. And then when you do have grants, and if it's grant funded and it runs out, well, that's that. See ya. So insurances, grants, the money, unfortunately, the money is going to dictate how long and how much treatment you're going to get.
So I know here in Illinois, it's stated that we will not put you out on the street homeless.
Correct. Yeah, hospitals will also state that, they're not going to treat you based upon your ability to pay or not pay. And that's something that in rehab facility I've strongly brought up several times when the insurance says, you know what, we're done. You can't make a case for this person to continue to stay here for us to continue to pay. They've been kicked out the door with maybe 2 hours notice. That's that. Sorry, your insurance doesn't want to cover this anymore. And the client, there's many times that the client wants to stay and is genuinely engaged and begging to stay because they do want the help. And very rarely have I seen, accommodations be made to keep them. Now, interestingly enough, I've worked for some agencies, we talked about nonprofit, for-profit. I've also worked for privately owned agencies as well. Those seem to be the ones that are going to be more willing to accommodate a client and possibly, pick up the tab and let them stay, even when insurance doesn't want to pay anymore. So they're out there. They're far and few beyond. But, again, you have to answer to the insurance company or the payee source as far as what's going on with the client and if they're going to be allowed to continue in treatment.
What are the different metrics the different funding sources are looking at?
They are looking at physically, they'll look at, there's 7 dimensions that they're going to look at that paperwork has to be filled out on the client, usually every 2 weeks. 50% of the work that the counselor, primary provider is going to be doing in there is going to be paperwork for the insurance company. They're going to want to know, is the client, what's their motivation? What stage of change are they in? Are they pre-contemplative, contemplative? Are they really engaging in treatment?
And can you give me just a brief rundown on those, just so the audience understands like what contemplative means and all of that?
Yeah. So are they thinking about changing? Have they committed to changing? Are they in the action stage? Are they actually taking change? Are they going to session? Are they doing the treatment work that is suggested to them? Are they meeting with their counselor on time? Are they willing to do and engage with support networks? Things like that. Or are they just, sitting back, not participating in group therapy? Are they just telling you what they think you want to hear? So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so those are the metrics that funding bodies are looking for to say, okay, well, we'll continue funding.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like your stay here. Yeah.
Yes. Now, but now this is based upon the counselor's assessment of this person. So they're not talking to the client, So client might be resistant and not really on it. And so they might be like, you know what? I'm only here because, my family wants me here. As soon as I get out, I'm using. If a counselor is authentic and puts that on paper because that's what's happening, insurance is going to say, we're not going to pay for this. And they're going to cut that off. Is the counselor going to put that on paper? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's very subjective, and it's coming from, a second party. It's not even coming from the client himself.
Right. You went out on your own to do your practice. So, I'm assuming to talk more, to encourage or to inspire this more.
Mm-hmm.
What have you added to your practice, and how do you take that metric to be able to know that you're being successful?
The way I approach this is I work from the inside out with the client instead of the outside in. So instead of addressing first, you're using drugs, you got to stop, you got to detox you. Not that that's sometimes it is necessary to start there. I use what's called spiritual alignment, the method of spiritual alignment. You, for whatever reason, lost touch with authentic self. We need to get you back engaged and reconnected. I'm not going to tell you who that is. I'm going to give you some suggestions and tools to help you work through that and walk alongside you as you, go through that journey, through that process. And when we can get back into spiritual alignment, we also develop what's called emotional intelligence. I'm really big on emotional sobriety. What are you craving emotionally? When you take the drug away and that's gone, and the physical craving, is over with, the craving that primarily is kicking in is an emotional one. And people will mistake that for craving for the drug. It's what are you craving emotionally that you aren't getting? And so people are always looking outside of self to fill that. And so what I do is, we're going to look on the inside. You are able to provide yourself with that. You are soul, source, universe, energy, nature, Buddha, God, Allah, Tao, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. It's not something you find. It's something you are because you are it. How do you tap into that? I don't drug screen. People kind of like, I don't drug screen because I don't feel like that's the outcome measurement that treatment facilities use. To me, That's the last symptom of quote unquote addiction that's going to develop. Once that starts, this has been going on way before anybody picks up or turns to some sort of processing, sex, gambling, food, all of that, which, by the way, most rehabs don't even touch on that issue of it. So, you're peeing clean in a cup, I'll say pissing clean, living dirty. What have you changed, So you're saying, how do you measure that? And it's subjective. It's subjective. It's self-report of the client. If somebody's not really vested in this and understanding this, I'm very selective about who I'm going to work with, because they need to understand up front, the value of what I'm providing them with, the solution to what they're searching for.
And I agree with that. And that's how I do the same thing. Like, I go into IOP programs, and the first thing I say is, I don't care about your sobriety.
Right.
That's
right.
Shit your problem. Like I'm not here to try and keep you clean, because I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really appreciate that you're doing work without doing drug screening and other things like that. How do you deal with like shifting the habit, or how do you keep people questioning?
A lot of times, like you're saying, they don't have the awareness of what they're doing. They don't know why they're doing it. So if you start working from the inside out, you kind of almost got to, for a minute, put that on the back burner. Like, what are they doing? Are they shifting to something else? And you just got to, I'm a big fan, I go straight for it, just straight for the source of, this is what the issue is, this is what I'm seeing. We don't have time to waste, we don't have time to pretend you're not doing this or you're not doing that. It's, why. And so going back into, and childhood stuff, and this is where I come from. Let me start it from here. When you're born in pure, positive, unconditional love. You are unconditional love. You're in spiritual alignment. You're coming in here, whatever, from wherever, however. But when we're born in complete spiritual alignment. And through life, we get pulled out of spiritual alignment by parents want us to do certain things, teachers need us to do certain things, society needs us to be a certain type of way. And we lose authentic self, and we feel the detachment of that. We feel the gap, and we feel that pain. We feel that as, I just don't quite fit in. I just don't know. I just feel wrong. You feel guilt. You feel shame for something. Something happens to you, sexual abuse, things like that, or maybe just parents getting divorced. It doesn't have to be on, trauma's on a spectrum. But for whatever reason, you get detached, and you feel the pain of that detachment on the emotional level. And whatever you can find that distracts you from not feeling that emotional pain, I don't care, what it is, you're not addressing it. And so everybody, when you're saying everybody has some type of addiction, everybody has some type of way of distracting themselves. When we all go in and out of alignment all day long. But if you can find a way to stay true to your authentic self, just 51% of the time throughout the day, you've shifted. It's not like a college degree. Like once you get it, you're good. You're in alignment for the rest of your life, or you're, emotionally sober. It's not how this works. Your emotions are going to be your guidance system, as to, am I working in alignment and living true to self and my values, or am I not? And everybody, I don't care who you are, goes in and out, in and out. Unfortunately, addicts and alcoholics, and I'm really starting to, on my own, kind of move away from even using those labels, because I think they're more putting us in a box than anything. They get a bad rap. They get thrown under the bus because they're using a substance that society just doesn't like. It's way more socially acceptable to be a sex addict than it is a heroin addict, even though it's the same idea of what's happening behind it. And I get really hyped about that, because society just doesn't understand that. And then addicts, alcoholics get thrown under the bus, and I'm like, wait a minute, let's take a look at what you're doing and what's really happening underneath here, because everybody's got something going on.
Okay. When I do my workshops, I often talk about Netflix. I often talk about, food. I talk about, people, drinking coffee without being aware that they're doing it. They're not making the choice. They're just out there and they are engaging in these activities because they just happen to be what I do. And
Right.
I'm doing that without being aware of having made the choice or having, prepared myself in a life. I mean, one time I was asked, well, wouldn't having a long day just like want to just chill out in front of Netflix? And I was like, well, yes, it would, but why are you deciding to live a life in which that's the case? And
Yes, exactly. Because I think people in recovery, they're coming from so far on the bottom of just that bondage that when they do move up and they get like a decent life that's okay and it's status quo, it's progress. It feels like an improvement, and it is, but then they just stop. And I'm like, dude, there's something way on this other side. Let's keep going. Like, live up to the potential of, of what this is. It's so big that sometimes I don't think we can wrap our minds around. And when the majority of people, addicts and alcoholics or not, are living their life on that, okay, status quo level, I've got a 9 to 5, I've got, 2 kids, I've got the house that I've wanted, I'm not on the dope house floor anymore. And that's big. Listen, that's progress, and some people are okay there, but it's like you're not living up to the authentic self. You're still not completely in alignment into, what's out there for you and lining up with your passion and what really just motivates you. Because family wants to keep you in that box, man. The second you start thinking maybe you can do something bigger than that, you're forcing them to also look at themselves. And they don't like that very much. They can stay just right here, just well enough, so that everybody just gets along, and that they can just stay right where they are. So,
yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned was this idea of like you got your house, your 9 to 5 job, and your kids. Those might be things you don't want in your life, but because they're so acceptable and those are the markers, those are the metrics in which we are determining your success, well, you went from being an addict to now being a chump. I don't know, like whatever, like to being like, what we all wanted you to be.
Yeah, it's like you kind of sold out, because it's like, again, we're measuring from the outside in instead of the inside out. And the danger in that is I've seen so many people, they get to like this 2-year mark and then something happens. It's like, can't do it no more. And then like a relapse happens and everybody's like, I don't understand. Everything was fine. No, everything wasn't fine, because it doesn't just happen. It looks good on the outside, but on the inside, they're still dying. It's like putting a fresh coat of paint on a house where the foundation is still leaking. Everybody that drives by that house is going to say, you know what, that's a really nice house, because they're not taking the time to go all the way in and seeing what's on the inside. And on the inside, people are dying, and they're not saying that. They're going to meetings where everybody's like, life is great, joyous and free. Nobody's talking about, you know what, I'm not feeling it, like something's missing. And then they feel like something's wrong with them, and then the isolation starts, and then one day, whatever it takes, one little thing happens, and then boom, they're right back where they ended up, because we're not working from the inside out, and that's, a big shift in what I do, comparatively speaking, to what treatment facilities do, because that is another, criteria they're going to look at. Do they have a job to go back to? Do they have family to go back to? And I'm just thinking, how long are they going to keep that job, if they're not going to really get true, sustaining emotional sobriety?
This brings up evidence-based. What you're doing in your practice, is that evidence-based?
It is not evidence-based.
Would it be considered?
Anything that is like what we call alternative options to treatment, which would be looking at the more spiritual end of things, spiritual alignment, it's not evidence-based. Evidence-based is more like you hear the term cognitive behavioral therapy, behavioral modification, motivational interviewing, which is, change the thoughts to change the outcome.
Packaged products of the therapeutic industry.
Correct. Because if you're not using evidence-based treatments, insurance isn't going to pay for it, which is why I don't take insurance, because it's not, you know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not AR and all that, but in order to use evidence-based treatment, you have to be trained to use it. So you have people working in rehab facilities that are not trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, but best believes they're given out a worksheet on cognitive behavioral therapy in groups within a group, and they're not trained to be using the evidence-based treatments, I'd say half of the time, in these facilities.
And what sort of training do these certificate holding counselors, what sort of training do they get?
Yeah, so usually what they're going through is usually online courses that take about, depending, they can work at their own pace, of a lot of read and then answer these questions, move on to the next level. I hate to say that, but that's what it is. Now, when they go out into the field, yeah, they're working under a supervisor, but they're meeting with that supervisor once a week. The billing is most likely done under the supervisor's name and credentials for the insurance purposes, but the client's never seen that supervisor that might have that higher credential. So that's another way they get around that. And a lot of that work that they're doing with the certifications is not what I call the self-awareness work. If you don't have self-awareness, I don't care what licensure, if you're a master's degree, whatever, PhD, screw it. If you don't have self-awareness, find something else to do. It's because it's just not. You'll get somebody clean and sober, but is it going to be sustainable to keep going in that direction? You're able to get somebody up on their feet, but are you going to be able to provide them the tools to stay on their feet? There's three things that I will tell people. I want to help people. What do I do? Three steps that I've come. You have to first know yourself. And the good news is we all deep down inside in our soul, we really know who we are. We know that, okay? We get detached from that. We get out of alignment with that. We get out of, away from that truth of the soul. We know who we are. The second step is you have to be who you are. In other words, you have to live your life according to who you really are. Now that sounds really simple, but, think about when you go to dinner at your family's house. Are you going to talk about some of the things, that are your passions, or are you just going to kind of keep it, I'm good, everything's fine? I mean, you're going to kind of play along and, know who you are, be who you are, live your life according to that, make choices and decisions, including what line of work you want to get into based upon who you are. And then the last piece is you have to share who you are. In other words, you have to let other people see you in this state. And that's vulnerable shit. That's being transparent. That's saying, this is who I am, flaws and all, take it or leave it. But this is where I'm at, and this is what I'm doing with my life, and this is who I am. So difficult, simple but not easy.
Yeah, that's good advice. Oh, weird.
Self-awareness equals God consciousness. If you can tap into you and your authentic self, you're going to know God, higher power, soul source, universe, energy, your unconditional love. Know that, be that, and just basically live true to who you really are, and following your passion, no matter what. And sometimes that means you got to go left when everybody else is going right. Go and do that, and be easy with yourself. Just be easy. Allow yourself to be you. Don't be so hard on yourself.
So treatment centers are a place that many of us are going to end up. We've just given you a lot of information that treatment centers are holding a lot of cards for their funding, for their for how they treat people, for even though it's stated that they won't kick you out, they very well may. So in that, I don't want to kind of go to this good, bad, but we do need these treatment facilities.
Treatment facilities are not all bad. Absolutely not. They're offering you the opportunity to get started, but they're not the end all and the be all. So understand that this is just the beginning. If you're getting into treatment, go. Get your head together. They're offering you the opportunity to get clarity on some things. And they're offering you an opportunity to hit pause and figure out, what is it that you really want to do with your life and what direction you want to take. And you will always get into it. You're always going to get out of it what you put in. But at the end of the day, you're not powerless. It's how much are you going to put into this process. Again, treatment facilities are made up of human beings and people, and at the core, genuinely do want to help you. So if you want the help, it is out there. But I definitely recommend taking advantages of any type of resources, advocates, like yourself, and educate yourself on how the process of getting in there works, and just, those things of what you need to know so you don't get snapped into it. But yeah, no, they're not all bad. I always recommend people to treatment in order to, just get that clarity and clear your head for a minute and then get started back on life.
Yeah.
It's like driving a car. You don't have to wait till it hits E to put gas in it. You don't have to wait for the E light to come on. There are a lot of people that keep their gas tank full. The rehabs is going to teach you, look, your gas is on E. This is where you go to get gas. This is where you go to fill up. Whether you choose to do that down the line or not, again, I'm saying sources are out there where you don't have to wait till the gas gauge hits E. You're able to pull off the road of life for a minute, tune yourself up, and get back on. But don't slap the happy sticker, the smiley face sticker over your gas gauge, because you want to see when your life's starting to go, when the tank's starting to creep towards E, you want to see that. So treatment facilities definitely afford you the opportunity to take a look at what's going on with you and get you back on the road of life for sure.
That's beautiful. April, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So just as a recap, most treatment centers are a little more than a space of triage. They're not a solution, so they should not be treated as such. The skill sets of your counselor, no matter who they are going to be limited. But, and this depends on where you are, because you are in a space of triage, my suggestion is to trust them. To counselors, on the other hand, I want to say, know your limitations. Refer out when things get beyond your reach. Many of us who help others, especially those of us coming from our own traumatic pasts, can easily pass on our fear and trauma inadvertently because of a triggering situation. I think every counselor needs to listen to this podcast and start recovering themselves. Doing that will expose that alcoholism is merely a symptom, not a disease. The disease is far greater, much further reaching than alcoholism. April's recovery concepts and consulting stands as a beacon to those who are lost in the repetitive cycle of addiction, an alternative approach to the traditional, which has never really put up any significant numbers. April offers her experience of not only working in the field, but also working on herself. You can find links to connect and work with April in the description of this episode. I encourage you to rate and review this episode to help others find it when they're in need of this information. Creating this content and connecting with such great people is more than my pleasure, but my pleasure don't pay my rent. If you benefit from my podcast, please consider heading over to anchor.fm and supporting the production of this podcast. If you also follow me on Instagram and other outlets, please consider being a regular contributor through my Patreon account. Links to those are also in the description of this episode. Thank you for listening to the Recover Yourself podcast, and until next time, keep recovering yourself.